Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Stankorb. Today, we have an absolute legend joining us, and this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. On this episode, we're hanging out with none other than Steve Howe, iconic guitarist for Yes and Asia, and one of the most distinctive and influential guitar players to ever pick up the instrument. We'll be diving into his incredible career, from his groundbreaking session work in the London scene in the late 60s to becoming a cornerstone of progressive rock history with Yes, and topping the charts with Asia. We'll also talk about something very exciting, the upcoming anniversary tour celebrating Yes' Fragile album. Steve shares some behind-the-scenes insights on the tour, the legacy of the classic tracks, and what it's like to keep the music alive for generations. So grab yourself a guitar, pour yourself a beverage, and settle in. This one's special. Let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Steve Howe. Congratulations on the this tour that's coming up. It's a very exciting 50th anniversary of Fragile. And oftentimes when artists go back and if they're remastering their catalog or just getting to listen to some outtakes and hearing things with fresh ears, they kind of discover some things or maybe find some little hidden gems. I'm just curious if there's any of the albums in your catalog that's happened recently where you've gone back and you've listened and maybe you've heard some, in the studio discussions between band members that just kind of is a walk down memory lane.
Well, as an example, no, not that. We didn't have a lot of audio being recorded, and Warner Music Group of doing a very thorough, if not overly thorough, job of completing the idea of re-releasing, in Dolby Atmos stereo by Stephen Wilson, and the original, which is obviously the best. The original mix is, and then they find other stuff, and sometimes they run it by me, or they do run it by me. Sometimes I have a chance to say, "Whoa, that's a bit ropey," or "I don't like that," or "That's the wrong thing." But so I would say that I've grown to accept that, like, say, for instance, the Tales from Topographic Oceans that's coming out. It's got live Tales from Topographic on it as well, which you might want, and it has a few other outtakes. I mean, it's rare. There is nothing like a cherished song that we didn't release. So there's nothing really particularly worth having. But for interest factor, there are development recordings that show you how we first of all did the song very appallingly and then worked on the song so it was brilliant. That's my description.
Yeah, it seems like in that process, you guys there's probably one or two kind of gatekeepers for the writing process. Everybody's contributing, but it seems like because the compositions were so dense, it seems like maybe you, or I don't know if it was Chris, I'm not sure exactly who it might be, that was kind of keeping the momentum and remembering all the pieces as they were being assembled.
Well, in the rehearsal room, we used, I used a cassette recorder and then Revox, with two mics. And usually when we listened to them, we just went, it sounds dreadful, but it was a structure. That's how we remember. Because when we didn't do that, we couldn't remember it the next day. What did we do here? So the tape, whether it's cassette or quarter inch, was always useful. And that's what we took in the studio. And we played it once and said, God, that's dreadful. It's going to sound so much better. And that was really, Eddie offered, like talking about Fragile. That's really how we approach life, is that we knew that the rehearsal room was going to sound just awful, but it did have a key, for us to build on and do better things with.
Yeah. Would it seems to me with the in the early 70s when you're going and representing the material live, it would be a very difficult thing for you to be able to, with the technology then, to be able to put across lap steel and nylon string and 12 string guitar and all the different colors that uh,
Well, I did that to the extent that it was possible on stage, or I've even found better ways with a little bit more technology of being able to do that along the way. But the way we did it in the early days was surprisingly good. I mean, I used a real 12 string, on say I didn't use a variax. I mean, I love variaxes, but in those days there wasn't a variax, so I had to use a 12 string. So all of that, in a way, that was good as well. It was good because it created more authenticity. We didn't always do that. When we first played in You and I played all the 12 string on an electric Gibson, so it didn't sound really anything like and You and I. But I didn't mind at the time because there wasn't an easy solution. But then eventually I put a 12 string on a stand and I started using stands and different configurations of pedal boards. And then the sliding steel guitar started to evolve. And so I tried to keep the colors as close to the records as I can, like I do now. But there wasn't much of a drive to do that. It was really if you could just do anything, nobody really complained. Your version of how you were going to purport to reproduce that was left up to you really. But I think now everybody collaborates more and says, "Hang on, I don't like that chord," or "That's the wrong note," or we're more thorough, if you like, about the performances having the notations correct. But also the personality is another thing. It's not just about the notes, it's a lot about the sound, but also the personality comes through, and that's what the joy of live playing is, that you present your whole package, what you look like, what you're wearing, how you're singing, the whole thing. It's a very exposure thing being live, but it's actually an interesting challenge.
Yeah. When when you introduced the lap steel into the compositions and then for live, were you coming from a thing of being a fan of like Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant and Santo and Johnny, or were you just hearing sounds that you thought, well, I have these ideas of melodic lines that only a slide can provide, and maybe I'll present that on the lap steel. I don't know that I've ever read your influences when it comes to the lap steel.
Oh, I have put them out there. Yeah, and you're right. Speedy West is one of the most dazzling players ever heard, and so was Jimmy Bryant on the guitar. So the two of them were a super hot licks duo, who virtually invented the dazzling guitar solo. But like you say, John Santo and Johnny, that was a lovely Fender sound that he was getting. And there's loads more guys, that I tune into who do wonderful steel. So I did come to it with a history of country music, but I didn't feel restricted that it was for country music. No, it was for me to kind of exploit. And the other ingredient very important is that my 175 guitar or those kind of guitars, yeah, there were lots of noises I couldn't make on it. I mean, bending's okay, bending a tone or something, but on a steel, you can bend octaves. It's much more exciting. Wow. So
Yeah.
I love that freedom, and in fact, I got kind of wild going for the one and things like that. I got really wild about what I wanted to do on that guitar that I wouldn't play on a 175. But that's because Chet Atkins influenced me so much that I move around the styles just freely, And I was just listening to the other side, a track called The Other Chet Atkins, an album called The Other Chet Atkins, where he only plays Spanish guitar, and it is, very much a Spanish kind of music album, which is I hadn't listened to it for many years, and it was a joy. Some of it was a bit middle of the road, but a lot of it was just fantastic because that's what I got from him was that, hey, you just move across the guitar. Besides loving Julian Bream and John Williams and Segovia, But in the country guitar, there was a lot. There was a lot to absorb, and I've continued that. In fact, one of them I love, like "Sweetheart of the Rodeo" by the Byrds. It shows how a group can go from 12 string pop almost, but then 8 Miles High, psychedelia, and then go country, and that was a lovely progression to watch. And I think the clever bands can morph with their style and take a new style and even make that work, or they can keep developing their own style, which is more like what Yes do, in my mind, is that we don't want to repeat ourselves. We don't want to sound like we come from the 70s. We want to sound like a band who's developed over the 50 years or so that the band's been going, you know.
Yeah, I think for so many of us that were influenced by you as we were coming up on the guitar, you were hard pressed to find somebody that had the influence of Barney Kessel, Chet Atkins, Julian Bream,
Hmm.
um, all the lap steel influence. So when you're hearing that, if you're especially if you're coming from previously only being influenced by blues based guitarists, which we loved, it was it blew my mind to think, oh my gosh, you can present so many colors and be so modern, but at the same time hinting the past. That was a
Yeah.
amazing influence for me to get my first lap steel and get into that whole thing. So it was an amazing. You couldn't find players like that that were doing so many different things until maybe much later.
Well, I mean, all those styles have had an important role in me, and they all connect, you know. And I didn't want to. I was, yeah, you're right. I mean, the blues guitar thing had got to me where I had played, you know, blues in my first bands, and then I played some soul, and then I played some psychedelia, and then I was like a songwriter with a bunch of guys. So I was not tied to blues, but like everybody, was very impressed by the blues. But I did actually prefer, in the most part, I preferred Big Bill Brunsey above everybody else because, you know, an acoustic player, but also his voice was really great. I love all the players, but so blues, yeah, I did want to get out of the habit of playing,
Right.
you know. I mean, I just had it with 12 bars, but I love them now. I mean, I'll always jump on a 12 bar and I like it a lot. But that doesn't mean to say I want to stay, you know, in the traditional style. And you know, there were great players like Buddy Guy had a period, you know, in the 60s when he was more understated and he was a very powerful singer as well. So when you get that combination, and you know, a lot of people like BB King, and I liked him too, but I wanted to rid myself of blues really, and I vowed not to play blues, you know, commercially or in Yes, you know, in for a very good reason that it lacked my identity. I hadn't found a, you know, I mean, I can jazzy, bluesy stuff quite well, and I can most probably play 12 bars all night and keep finding things to do because it's an amazing thing, but not if I'm entrenched in it having to be in a certain style.
Yeah, it's there was some avant-garde things that I mean the first time that I sat down with a guitar and tried to learn Close to the Edge, the first bit you kind of go, "Oh my God, what in the hell?"
Mm,
That
mm,
whole passage.
mm.
I thought that that was interesting too, that you guys were not afraid of really going forward and thinking of being, I mean, the progressive rock title is over or prog. But this is very progressive sounding thing. There's nothing like it that I can remember coming from a group like that.
We hadn't done anything like it either before, and that was the beauty of the 70s. We kept kind of going shifting our sand, you know, so that it was kind of different. Yeah, I mean, Close to the Edge was a very ecliptic album for John and I because of the 20-minute scale of Close to the Edge and the way then had two other songs which were both 10 minutes long. So it was a nice format we used on Relaya and, you know, to some extent on other albums. But that mainly was the influences we were feeling, and that wonderful combination. Because Close to the Edge wouldn't be the same if we took anybody out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you know, you take somebody out, and it would just wouldn't have been the same. Now, you know, Chris always, said, you know, improvisation needs structure. You know, and he was absolutely right. So that's where we showed that kind of craft is we had this structure going on, and somebody else was playing the same structure in like twice the speed on the keyboards. So the keyboards going and Chris was going and I was going all over the place improvising. But I had my cues, you know, that octave thing I start with and the general flavor of it being sort of like a true solo at the end, kind of slightly caudal thinking, but also, well, I mean, just cooking up a thing. Basically, Chris, Bill, and I did that intro to Close to the Edge with just us, you know. So we had a little cooking groovy thing going, and we captured it. So, but Fragile was the kind of stepping stone about the qualities of Yes sound. And Eddie was growing rapidly, he was confident, had great ideas. And I was intrigued, you know, to learn everything I could, like I did from Joe Meek in the 60s. And like every producer I ever worked with, I'm always learning from them, you know, because that's how you become a producer yourself. You pick up what the angle of the dangle is, you know, how this is going to work. And also, like with Asia, with Mike Stone, you know, he was a totally different kind of producer. You know, he was a seriously rock and roll producer, but he was also, he knew what he was doing. So you know, you could leave it in his hands, and that's what a producer's supposed to do. Well, Eddie was our co-producer, and we left the whole gambit of things, you know, to him really was how you were going to get this on tape to start with, and then he oversaw the mixing by sitting in the middle with the drums, and then I had the guitars, John had the vocals, and Chris had the bass, and basically. Sometimes somebody, well, we all looked after the keyboards. So there was this sort of team, you know, the production team of Yes. And I, of course, learned a great deal about that because we all made mistakes and then we fixed them or we didn't, and then we lived with them and said, well, that teaches you a lesson, you know, learn from your mistakes. So I just mentioned that people who don't listen to their own recordings are kind of wasting their wasting their lives because I review back on my music periodically with no set rules. You know, I just sort of think, oh, I think I'll play that. I'll have a listen to that, and I then get drawn into thinking, well, that wasn't a bad record. You know, like Asia's first record. You know, I might put that on and think, yeah, I mean, time again. You know, it's great. And there's great things about that record because of the collaboration, much like we were saying about Yes. Anyway,
Yeah, the back then it was kind of an all hands on deck when it came to mixing. The mixing process was every bit of a performance as the actual recording of the individual parts, and
you
that
could
was
say that.
especially for Yes. I would think that that would be the
Mm.
the manipulation of the board to get the desired effect from you and Eddie and Chris and Bill.
Yeah. I mean, we were making it up as we went along. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody in the room could stand up and say, "Look, I know how to do this," because, you know, because nobody was really completely in charge. We could all influence, and that's what was great. So, you know, there was fun times like, you know, if Chris put the bass up a bit, then maybe my hand might think, hang on a second, I think I'll match that, you know. Then Eddie would say, hang on, no, no, we're getting too far here. And Eddie had to do a lot. I mean, Chris liked his bass very loud, and it was a great thing that he liked it loud because it was so effective. But when he came to master that for a record, you had to cut some of the frequencies out because it just would not go on vinyl. And so there were lots of things that we took for granted with Eddie. But there again, I think that a band takes themselves, each other rather, for granted, you know, that they're going to be there for the band, you know, and that's an important, if you like, spirit in a band is that you start to trust people and they're going to develop and you know, and then sometimes it falls apart and you get somebody else, and then you build that new trust with them. And obviously, Yes has had members, but in the main part, we're talking about the fragile, close to the edge era. Not only are we doing the tour, you know, like we said, the where we feature fragile, and it will be very exciting. We used to think, Yes, used to think in the 2010 era that was really the most difficult album to play, but that wasn't so much because of the notes or the dots or the songs, but it was where you put this album. You know, it starts from roundabout, and but it finishes brilliantly with Heart of Sunrise. So eventually, well, we're going to do it as the second set of two sets, you know, and that's a good placement for it. And so, yeah, the music does have, it takes a fair bit of rehearsal to kind of get everybody to really understand, you know, what the tempos are and what the volume levels are and things. So there's a lot to do in a rehearsal, but we do that in really only a week, really, you know, of playing back together. But musicians, they live slightly on the edge. Because there's a thing about getting ready. If you get ready too soon, you're not putting your preparation into action. So if you get ready a little bit before the tour, you know that all this information you just gathered about, what it is exactly, precise. I mean, I know the songs, easy, but there's twiddly bits I don't. So I need to work those up, get them right, and then put them into practice. So I need to play them when I've just revised them. So that's why I keep it like, maybe the 2 weeks max up before a tour is when I'll start really homing in on, and then the last week really homing in on any twiddly bits I'm not playing fluidly. I'll work on those. And then you get together with the guys and you work out everybody's problems if they've got any, or how rapidly we can get the thing moving. Because it's not only, like I've said all along, not only the dots and the sounds and the right notes, but it's also the kind of attitude, the spirit, of the band has to be awakened for the tour, and you have to kick in and try and get the show up and running as quickly as possible. It's like a play, I mean, a lot of first nights of a play, so people forget their words, and the show doesn't go so well. But we can't afford to do that. We have to know the music. But as much as you try, what makes the show great is when you've done two or three and it's kind of on a roll, and then somewhere in the middle, you're like, I can play this without even thinking. I mean, it's just coming at me. So it starts to become autopilot. And that's when the music gets very high. Maybe you hit a full moon and the music gets really, really kind of exciting and you wonder how. But that's because the machinery is oiled, and the fruits of the efforts are then rewarding, for the audience. But also, a musician has to like what he's doing.
Oh,
It's no good getting up there and thinking, "Oh my God, what I'm going to do now." You've got to go. You've got to put your heart into it.
yeah. Are you when you're coming up with new material, are you discovering things that or influences that maybe you had forgotten about, things that are kind of coming to the, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a musical inspiration. Maybe it's something that, when it comes to literature or painting or something that's inspiring you to create things. Because
Everything kind of filters into the center of all of our minds, about what we like and what we don't like, what's pleasure. I like lots of things in art. I particularly like glass. I like glass works of art. So I'm kind of like always there's a reference point, But when it comes down to lyrics, John Davison is really up the game on Yes lyrics, I must say. But on the Quest and Mirror to the Sky, there's quite a lot of my lyrics, and I do that periodically. I think I'm not writing any lyrics anymore, messing around, and then I get some, and I think, oh God, I got some lyrics. Oh God, because there's a lot of kind of maneuvering. Unless you're one of these crazy people who think they can kind of ad lib lyrics, that's not really on. So lyrics are another craft, and when they come at me from John Davison, I know he's already done all that craft work, the
right.
the sensibility, the honesty, the truth, the words are in there, and so there's that once again the group can only be about collaboration, and obviously that's an important ingredient.
Yeah, it's a surprise sometimes where you find the inspiration, because as we get older and we suffer through all the things that life throws at us, loss of loved ones and
Yeah,
things that are difficult, it
yeah.
infuses our art and our music in ways that we could never anticipate.
I guess so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I only know that as a musician, I can only keep going. It's not a question.
Right.
But obviously, if physical or mental impediments happen, then I want to quit. I want to get out of the running and not goof around being lousy. I've got high standards, and those standards have to be met. That I can raise my game to the appropriate level to be doing that. It's like tennis players, they say, oh, he beat him even though he was playing his B game. You know? And in music, there isn't really a B game. I mean, we have a thing inside our heads that knows that we know when we're doing it really well, and that's a joy, of course. But like beginnings of tours and certain nights on tours, something about the sound, something about a light, something about somebody screaming at you all night, can erode your concentration. And that's what people who come to shows and make a lot of noise don't seem to remember is that they come to listen to the music. Then they come to listen and not disturb the music, not add their voice to the music because it's not appropriate. Thank you very much. So, but the light and shade, the dramas, if only audiences could listen to the very quiet bits without feeling anything has to be said. They certainly do in Japan and in Europe. In America, there's this kind of like sense of, oh, now's the time I can yell something out. No, this is the time. You listen to these notes. They're very important notes. They're serene. They're in a wash. They're suspended. They're tantalizing for 99% of the audience. But anyway, I've weathered all those storms, and in the '60s, there was also a very aggressive thing in England about mods and rockers, and if you were in a sort of mod band, then every rocker hated you,
Right.
and they would stare at you and go, "I'll have you later." So I've weathered all this stuff, I've played in very plush places, and I've even played in it was that place in Moscow. God, I hope I never. Oh, well, I won't go there again. The Kremlin. We played in the Kremlin. Can you believe that? Oh, so I've been there, seen it, done it, bought the T-shirt, but I'm still doing it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it seems like there's for the folks that come to the shows that are watching that are really engaged, and
Yeah.
then you have other people that are hooping and hollering and watching from behind the screens of their iPhone.
Yes.
They're really missing something, and it makes me wonder: did they? Most of these people never attended shows when iPhones didn't exist and didn't fully experience just how special and powerful the show can be when you're just taking it in with your God-given senses.
Of the moment, living in the moment. Yeah, you see, that's what I suppose the internet has done. It's allowed us to live in many moments at the same time, like you and I, right now in different countries, and we're talking like you're in the room. So things have to. You are still there, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, because I heard a slight rumble. Yeah, I mean, it has changed the game. But what one can't do is one can't fight it. I mean, I've tried, and I can tell you, it's there, and we've got to sort of manage it. Of course, if you're in ears, then you don't hear very much of it, and I'm not. So that's part of the reason why I'm actually one of the special things about the way I play, and I dare say, not unique in any way. Other older performers might, is that I have monitors and I hear the room. What's going on in the room? I actually know what it is because even though I'm not standing in front of the speakers, I'm behind them. I
Right.
get a sense, and I've over the years been able to gauge and judge that sense of how right I might be if I say that's too loud, or you're not getting this out. When this is played, it's not in the room enough, or quite often, it's too loud. I mean, if you've got a keyboard going ding, 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 and that's going ding, 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 and the guy's singing, it's all wrong. So the balance, as we spoke about 10 minutes ago, the balance of the music is primarily important. It's more important, well, it's as important as the notes.
Yeah, there seems to be a preponderance of these newer bands that are using the a clean stage where everybody's running direct through using modelers and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which to me is anathema to why we got into as guitar players having the air move and interacting with that sound is and having a very tactile experience is kind of the
Well,
reason
yeah,
to get into it.
I still don't believe 100%. Well, I mean, I don't believe at all that radio guitar signal is as good as a cable. I mean, that's how old-fashioned I am in one sense that the cable is a connection to the amp, and I think it's direct. I don't want to go through a radio system to get my guitar to there. And usually because it changes the sound. But the first band, I tell you, who I ever saw do that was Ultravox in the UK. So I
Yeah.
went to see, I knew Billy Curry quite well. I think we just worked on each other's albums. Mine was Turbulence and his was called Transportation or something like that. And so I went to the show and there's nothing on the stage. I think they even had electronic drums as well. And there was no amps and nothing. And they were headphones in those days. I don't think it was in ears. And they had rock, Midge had a Rockman and Billy had his keyboards, but there weren't any amps, and it all came out the PA. And yeah, I mean, that made it very portable. In fact, practicality is part of the mother of invention, they say. That's a
Right.
good expression coined years ago. That if you're going to build some monstrosity that has to travel around with you on stage, then, be warned, it's pretty difficult. So that streamlining is very good.
Yeah, the I can see the convenience factor of it, being able to just plug in and that sort of thing. But there is
Mm.
a sense of it, feeling the air move, and just the tactile nature is a lot more. You feel a more direct connection.
It's more troublesome though. Well, I mean, no, I mean, I dare say it's a trade-off between either because obviously I can't control how loud something is in the acoustic sense. I can control how much of it I'm getting in my monitor, and that's fairly confused because there's quite a lot in my monitors. There's voices and there's a bass and there's keyboards and the drums. So it's quite a picture to get right. And some of it I don't need very much of because it's on stage with me. And yes, we're actually touring slightly differently. We're not using risers because we found that when we don't use risers, we actually play more intimately together. So we're after that, reality of it very much. So, but the guys love the in-ears, and I don't think John could sing like he does on stage without it. I think it really does help music, but it wouldn't help me.
Right. Uh, Going back to something you said earlier, how you were influenced by Joe Meek. Was there a lot of, like, prior to the band Tomorrow? Was there studio work that you were doing, like with Big Jim Sullivan, or any of those, any London session work that
Yeah.
you were doing?
What happened? Yeah, the Syndicates were Joe Meek, and then when I left that band, I joined the In Crowd, and they had a guy called Roy somebody. They had a producer, but then when Tomorrow came about, interestingly, because I had become a session guitarist, and I was doing sessions for this producer who liked me called Mark Wirtz. So I said to him, "Well, how about producing the band?" Well, he said, "Yeah, I'd like to check it out." So he did. He produced the band, and basically that's how Tomorrow got a deal with EMI was and then Keith did some further work with him, and he had a hit record which he's never been able to lose, called "Excerpts from a Teenage Opera," Grosser. And I was playing on that as well because I was one of Mark's guitarists. But in that course, not only with Mark, I did a lot of other sessions, but with Mark, sometimes he'd book three guitarists, and. I don't think it was Mark that first said this to me, but I got to a session, like 10 in the morning, with my 175 and a Gibson amp. I walked in and Jim Sullivan was there, and I said, "Well, he remembered that I don't read music, so somebody puts music in front of me," and I go, "Well, that I'll get the idea pretty quick." And the producer came out and said, "Well, you're playing lead guitar and Jim Sullivan's playing rhythm."
Mhm.
So I thought, Jesus, that's a
Wow.
step up. Okay.
No.
So that was the start of me gaining a lot of confidence, from things like that. Um, but also, I think the confidence also came from playing on stage as well. And the recording was like the new experience of finding out how you did that. And Mark was the first day the first day there was ever a session where there was only me was really buzzed me because I got to EMI one evening and went in studio two and I said, "Well, where is everybody?" He said, "No, it's just you." And I thought, Oh, that's great. Just me. So you see, I want you to play this theme, and it became the theme from the teenage opera, dong, dong, dang, ding, 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 dong. It's one of those kind of tunes. And so, of course, I learned it and double tracked it. He said, well, double track that. So I said, all right, well, play it exactly the same. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it sounded great, to hear myself in the studio, just focus on the guitars,
Yeah,
which is part of what I now do more or less, mostly at my own studio, where I record most of my guitars. But there are times when I'm at what Yes call headquarters, which is a studio in Sussex that we work with Curtis Schwartz, a brilliant, brilliant engineer. And so basically, some things I just get a desire to work on with Curtis and not do it all at my place. Although, of course, I've got all my guitars to choose from. So, you know, so there's different ways where my confidence grew, partly when Mark said, there's nobody here but you. And then the road, along there with Tomorrow and other bands. But obviously, when I joined Yes, there was a public, if you like, announcement. The Melody Maker had like, a new guitarist in Yes there. So I guess I was getting more confidence, by being recognised as an individual guitarist, and that was my cue. Like Albert Lee, Albert went from being a kind of soulful, jazzy kind of rock guitarist to being a country guitarist.
yeah,
And I did the kind of opposite. I came out into the 70s and kind of went, well, I want to be all kinds of guitarists to all kinds of, because I saw the guitar as a family. I didn't see it primarily as one instrument that I had one voice on. And then, of course, I played mandolin, and started featuring acoustics a lot and playing some banjo guitar and just kind of, and then when the steel came along, I knew this was big. Now, there are two steels in my life. There's the steel guitar that's only got like just no pedals. But the pedal steel is a different proposition. I have a new one by Williams, who's American company. It's a brilliant pedal steel that there's just a three pedals, five knee bars on one neck at E9 or E Nashville tuning. So basically, that guitar offers me a very special texture. I'm not so familiar with it generally. I mean, it features on To Be Over, and things like that. Pedal steel work, and it's a very good supportive instrument as well. It's beautiful. So I use guitars really as textures more than just, like a blues guitarist uses guitar, he uses the guitar, that was it. It always came at you. What I'm doing is got to come at you from three sides at once, the acoustic, the regular guitar, and also the family, the steels and things like that. I enjoy it.
well, I think when you hear your your story, it makes perfect sense because I would imagine the young Steve Howe, if you would tell them that in a few years' time you're going to be doing studio work alongside Big Jim Sullivan, you're going to be having your own band, and then
Mhm.
there's a good chance you're going to go in the evening if Tal Farlow comes through town, or if Wes Montgomery or whomever it might be, you're going to go. That's got to influence you and inspire you in a way, inform, if you like, who you
Well,
become.
it filled in the cracks. Having been a researchist kind of guitarist, I didn't particularly want to know who was famous. I wanted to know who wasn't famous,
Right.
and that's where Albert Lee was perfect. He was a guitarist. I thought I can't possibly be successful before Albert Lee's become successful. So I had these kind of concepts, but certainly seeing Wes Montgomery and Tal Farlow and many of my great love for jazz guitarists was building all that information, because what I did know is that when you watch a guitarist, you can't really work out how the hell he's playing that.
Right.
But one of the finest guitarists in the world, and Chet Atkins said this, is my friend Martin Taylor. Now, his
Taylor.
album Artistry, which I was lucky enough to produce for him, was a remarkable guitar album. He came so well prepared, and he plays mainly standards and some couple of Scottish tunes, and on that album he blows my mind, really. I mean, I was there when he played it, but I can listen to it and think that maybe this is one of the most ecliptic guitar records for me, because after all the people I've loved, Chet and everybody else, my old mate Martin is one hell of a guitarist. Yeah. I mean, but it's so musical and it's so flexing and muscly and sometimes he attacks a lot and he gets all this stuff going and he's a great arranger, really. I think that what like Joe Pass, I think one of his uh, he might be one of his favorite jazz guitarists who played solo. It's really about the music. It all comes back to the music. It's like songs. Without a good song, yes, wouldn't have been known. We had to get all those ingredients: songs, instrumentation, and somewhat, the other entrails of what you look like and whether you've got a good manager, whether you've got a good, there's a lot of ingredients. The luck that Yes had was not to be sniffed at, that we got some breaks and then we got on the tour with Jethro Tull. So in 1971, we'd just done the Iron Butterfly tour of Europe, which was also up the game for us because opening for a big band like that was great. And then, the next thing we know, we're opening for Jethro Tull, to 10,000 people in Canada, and it was absolutely thrilling, that first night. I can still remember that dressing room. I remember me standing there and I remember a tap on the door and a few things happened. Okay. All right, so we're going on, right. Okay. Heads down, and Yes went on and really knocked the people out. And they were there to see Jethro Tull. I didn't know who Yes were, hardly at all. And then because we had the Yes album out, but it didn't do so well it did very well in Europe, but it didn't do so well in America. Well, it did. It got to 30, I think, but it was bubbling, so all we needed was Fragile, which is the record we're going to play this year again. And what a song. 5% for nothing. Yes recorded one tune that is 1 minute 32 seconds of total bizarre, unusual things, and we strive to be that different again. I think right now that there's something great about just being brave and just thinking, well, this is pretty weird, but after all, we thought of it.
Yeah, it seems like the way that you influenced each other and the way that you relied on each other and featured each other, for with Chris on The Fish or with you and Mood for a Day and all the other it was that was the thing that was very exciting when you'd come well versed in the album and being able to see you guys play that live and hear all that kind of it seems like you guys were the ultimate champions for each other.
That's right. That's a good thing. Hey, listen, bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Thank you so much for tuning in. What an absolute privilege to spend time with the legendary Steve Howe. His influence on the guitar world and progressive rock is undeniable, and it was a pleasure to hear his stories and insights and what's ahead for the anniversary tour of Yes's album, Fragile. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us, and thank you for all listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do me a favor. Make sure you subscribe to the Guitar Hang podcast so you won't miss any of the incredible guests we've got coming up. And if you're digging the show, leave us a review. It really helps get these conversations out to more listeners who love guitar as much as we do. You can also follow us on Instagram, YouTube, or wherever you hang out online. Just search the Guitar Hang podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Jon Stankorb, and we'll catch you on the next one.